This was so enjoyable because you got right to the point, and it was quick.
Yeah.
Before I knew it, it was done, and I was like, oh, can't we go on?
Welcome to the Art Box, recorded in our beautiful Mesquite, Nevada, and sponsored by the Virgin Valley Artists Association. Our association provides creative opportunities for all ages. Get creative with us at the Mesquite Fine Arts Center, 15 West Mesquite Boulevard, or find us online at mesquitefineartscenter.com or on Facebook, The Art Box.
Today, I'd like to welcome to the Art Box in our Do It Best Hardware studio at the Mesquite Works STEAM Center. We welcome Brian Cornett.
Thank you, Steve. It's good to be here.
Yeah, and you're a local author. Not that you've always been local, but you're an author. You're local because I met you here.
That's true.
So,
Yes.
And Brian, you volunteer for Mesquite Works.
I do. I've been a volunteer at Mesquite Works for about 6 years. Our function is to help people with resumes and job interview skills, things like that. Help them get ready to get a job.
And I think you guys were kind of a catalyst of things coming back after the pandemic.
Yeah, we got involved with the STEAM.
That's okay. Mine's still on too.
STEAM Center at that point. And
right now, Brian has a phone call coming in that someone wants. Brian, help me get a job. Write my resume for me. All right, Brian, so you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? I see you were born in Michigan.
I was Muskegon, Michigan, on the west coast, about 2 miles from Lake Michigan. Grew up there through my junior year in high school, and then my folks and I moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Oh, okay. We moved our son in his sophomore year. He was not happy with us. So were you happy?
It gave me a chance to start over. I could change my persona, if you will. It was a smaller high school, and I became more involved in some things there. Made a lot of good friends. Graduated. I'm going to say this, back in 1951.
You graduated in 1951?
From high school, yes.
From high school?
Yes.
You don't look like you graduated in 1951.
Well, I did.
Yeah?
Started college at Western Michigan, and to be honest, I was having too much fun. And so after one semester, I saw that I wasn't going to get anywhere, and I quit school and enlisted in the United States Air Force. And I served 24 years.
It sounds like that was a good move for you.
That was the best thing I ever did in my life, was to join the Air Force. The defining thing, if you will, in what made me whatever I am today, that did it.
Did that take you to Korea?
It was during the Korean War, because the Korean War didn't end until 1953. I eventually got to Korea, but it was many years later.
Okay.
And I served in Alaska, my first overseas tour. Spent nearly 3 years there. And subsequent assignments were Germany and Vietnam, of course, and Okinawa, and some stateside assignments. I volunteered for Korea after I got through with tech school and got a specialty. I was trained as a cryptanalyst.
Okay.
Code breaker. Back in those days, that was a valid function. Not so anymore, because everything is computerized now, and it's almost impossible to work hand codes, if you will. In those days, it wasn't impossible, and our adversaries did it.
So when did you start writing? And were you, did you come out of the womb writing? You hear a lot of people, I was born to be an artist.
Yeah, I don't think so. I wasn't born to be that. I started in high school, actually. I and another classmate wrote some science fiction stuff for a fanzine in New York, and it was a monthly. They didn't use the term fanzine at that time, but that's what it was. Anyway, it was a mimeograph sheet kind of thing, and we wrote some stuff for them, and we alternated chapters, and we were about halfway through a novella when they quit publishing.
Oh.
My time in the Air Force didn't lend itself to allowing me to write. I traveled extensively in most of my assignments, and that made it more difficult. I didn't take the time. Obviously, the time was always there. It always is. But writers tend not to take it when they have the chance. And they use all kinds of excuses, family, job, whatever.
Writer's block?
Yeah, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, I hear my son use writer's block.
Yeah,
but you've done such a good half of a book. Finish it. I don't have the inspiration.
I don't have the words. That's the thing.
Is that it? Don't have the words?
The next, Hemingway used to quit writing when he knew what he was going to write next. And then the next day he'd go back and he'd reread what he had just written, and that gave him his starting point. You'd bust on from there.
Oh, okay.
That's a smart way to do things. If you're going to be a writer, you need to write every single day, even if it's what you think is garbage, because it isn't. Somewhere in what you've written is a useful kernel of something that'll start you off on a whole new tangent, maybe a whole new story. That stuff comes sometimes so easily. I wrote a lot of short stories. And of course, I've produced 2 novels, or a novella and a novel. They were outgrowths of the daily writing, which I try to do, but I'm not always successful at.
Do you write today still? Well, I know that you just gave me a book that I'm going to read.
Okay. Yeah.
And I read your other book.
Yeah. It sounds silly, but I have 3 novels in the works.
Yeah, I see one. You've got a real incident that happened at Gettysburg, okay, which piques my interest. We didn't live far from Gettysburg, so I've walked around Gettysburg quite a bit. And you doubt that it'll ever be finished to your satisfaction. We'll talk about that one, of course, but is there anything ever finished to your satisfaction? Are you happy here?
Yeah, I'm happy with Innocent Victim.
Okay. I mean, it's done.
Yes, it's done to the best of my ability at the time. You grow as you write. My first book, the novella, Swift Mission, is not as good as it could have been. But I ran into a constraint with the publisher. I was up against a timeline, and so I had to finish it, and I did. But it could have been better. The second one, I had more time to work with. It was a story I was deeply involved with because, as I said, it takes place in my hometown. It talked to me, it called to me, and it was easy to come up with the right words in that case. I didn't have writer's block.
But it's still fiction.
It is absolutely fiction.
Okay.
Absolutely.
You said it takes place in my hometown, but it takes place as fiction.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Right. I used the city Muskegon, Michigan, as the background city, as the city where this occurs, because I was familiar with it. They say you should write what you know. Well, fine. All of the great science fiction writers obviously didn't know of the worlds they were writing about.
Oh.
They made them up.
Yes, they did. Or they dreamed them up.
Yes.
Well, and I'll go back again to the one in Gettysburg. Is that going to be fiction?
It is.
Even though it was a real incident that happened?
Even though there was an incident there, I have fictionalized it. I've built a character who did not exist, obviously. A young man, farm boy, enlists, and I'll give you some of this, enlists in the Union Army, following his brother, who was wounded in a previous battle. Anyway, at Gettysburg, Devil's Den and Little Round Top, there was a unit, Michigan volunteer unit, which occupied a portion of the line below Little Round Top. They were charged by an Alabama and a Texas unit, and through a mistaken order, they fell back, and that's the incident.
Okay.
This fictional young man was sent back to find help because they were almost a rout. They were falling back, and could have been a breach in the line. And he finds a unit that comes to their rescue, which actually happened. Somebody did that. But I've used the incident as a catalyst for this young man's subsequent rise in the ranks of the Union Army and become involved all the way to the surrender at Appomattox.
Okay. Good. Good. But if we ever see it, good.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good story. But I find that there are some other things that need to be brought into it. For example, some things from the southern side. And once I went off on that tangent, this became not just a novella or a novel, short novel based on that incident. It becomes a saga of this family. And that takes a long time to write and a lot of research. And so I've kind of pushed that one aside until I can really get into it.
And find time to research?
Yes.
Brian, do you do all that now online, or
you can do it now?
Or do you
online.
travel?
I travel. I went to Gettysburg. I walked the ground that Michigan unit occupied, which I might say gave me chills. When you walk the battlefield, Gettysburg, I've talked to a lot of people, and they have the same reaction. It comes to you, gets to you. You get the same thing with some of the memorials in Washington, D.C. The Korean War Memorial, particularly, is a striking.
It is striking, isn't it? And it's very different.
Yeah. And
it's very ghost-like.
It is,
if I may say.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, I photographed it, but I've never done a good job because I needed to find the right day and the right time of day and the right weather, and I never found it.
Yeah. But the first time I visited that one, it's almost as good as the Vietnam Memorial.
Yeah, I wonder how many people have seen the Korean War Memorial.
I don't know. It's kind of out of the way.
Yeah, it is. And I was born in Washington, D.C., so I haven't been back now probably in 10 years, but I do like to go back and just walk. And I like to walk Arlington in particular. Are there any specific characters or scenes that you found particularly, and we'll go this, challenging or rewarding?
Yeah. Romantic. That's difficult. I shouldn't say it's difficult because there's a gazillion romance novels out there that I have to say they're all pretty much the same. And some people obviously can write steamy love scenes. I have difficulty with that. The writer shouldn't write to his well, I guess he can't write to a target audience. Obviously, young adult. People who like historical fiction, you can write to those. And if that's your target audience, if you're going to sell books, romance novels appeal to a certain segment of the population, and they buy a lot of books. They don't buy what I write, but they buy a lot of books.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I can see that. So who's your favorite character? Of your books?
Of my books. Probably Makarios in Innocent Victim. He's a detective lieutenant in a small-town police department, or mid-sized town police department. He's flawed in that he will turn a blind eye to minor transgressions of the law.
But was that your idea going into the book, that it would be flawed, or did it just happen?
No, I knew that. I had to make him that way to make it work, and I think it does. I had thought seriously about a sequel using the same basic character, and it was going to be related to drug cartel type stuff. But that's been done so well by Don Winslow that you can't match it. And there's no point in me trying. So I scrapped that, and I'm working on a whole different, I've got to say, story, because that's what I write, is stories. That's why I write, is I have a story to tell. I don't write to make money.
Yeah, so I won't ask the question, do you write for your soul or for money? You write for your soul, like most people, why they do art.
Yeah.
And some, not many, make money.
Yeah, that's true. And it's not of prime importance to me. If I've got a story to tell, if the story comes to me and I can see it from beginning to end, I'm going to write it. Whether it's a short story, or whether it's a novel to be, or whatever.
I liked your book. Was the one that I've read. That was Swift Mission. When you finished up Innocent Victim, was that, when you sat it down, was it rewarding?
Yeah, I enjoyed writing. Again, I was satisfied with what I was able to do with it.
Were you sad when it was done?
No, I was relieved.
Did the keyboard draw you in and say more?
No, but a lot of people have said more. Others who have written.
Did you have rewrites? Did you send it to an editor and they say?
I had a good editor who went through it. Yes, indeed, and you have to do that. You got to get away. You can self-edit, but
You're always going to miss something.
Yeah, and unfortunately, my editor missed a couple of things too, minor stuff. It's just the wrong word in the wrong place, and that may be a bit of printing problem. I don't know. The publishers usually will do a basic edit for you, and then they come back and say this needs to be changed or this doesn't work, but not nearly to the depth of a hired editor or someone who you trust to do a job for you.
Did you have to cut any out, or?
Not in Innocent Victim. I did in Swift Mission. There was a segment that the publisher objected to. That was the romance section.
Okay.
All right. I had the protagonist, the hero, get involved with one of the other characters. And the publishers thought that didn't fit him, his character.
Yeah.
And I tend to agree, although he too was flawed, or should have been, and that would have shown it better. But I took it out. It's one of the reasons I felt real happy with how that one finished out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I took a writer's workshop a couple of years ago, and there was already some published authors in my group. I was in the fiction group. And it was interesting of how many of them had to remove big chunks, that the publisher said, no, this must go. So how about literary influences? Do you have a favorite author?
Hemingway.
Hemingway?
Yeah. I've read everything he's written, and I've read probably 6 biographies, some good, some bad, but some with axes to grind, But he led it in really interesting life.
He did lead an interesting life, didn't he?
I've been fortunate enough to have been to Africa and East Africa, where he took his safaris and where he crashed and that kind of stuff. So I've seen some. In fact, I stayed in the room that he stayed in the hotel in Nairobi.
Oh, okay.
So,
any inspiration out of that?
no, afraid not.
No?
No.
The ghost didn't wake you up at night, or?
I looked for him. He wasn't there.
I had a hard time reading his books. The different language in those days, he wrote differently.
Yes, that's true. I tend to write along the same line, newspaperese, if you will. And that's what he was. He was trained as a newspaper writer, a correspondent, reporter. And to the point, get on with it. Not a lot of flowery stuff, although he could run on for pages in one sentence. In a couple of instances, he did. But I tend to write the shorter, quicker, to the point sentences, too.
Okay, you said about running on. What do you think of Cormac McCarthy?
Good writer. Excellent writer. I've not read a lot of his stuff. A couple of things, but he's good. He's good. He has a knack for bringing the reader into the scene.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
And that is if you can do that, you're a good writer. It's difficult, but if you can do that, that's the whole point of it.
Yeah, it's a very, very unique writer. A little bit of technology. When did you transfer from the typewriter to the computer? Assuming you have.
I have, yes. I had a good friend who worked for IBM, and he convinced me I needed to buy a computer back in 77, maybe, 78. But the first one that I looked at was the old TRS-80, if you remember those things. And it became easier. I wrote a lot of stuff by hand.
Okay.
Just scribbled it and then retyped, of course. But most of the drafts were pen and ink. Computers do make things easier. Technology does make things easier. You want to talk about AI now?
If you want to talk about AI, we can talk about AI.
AI is very useful if used properly. One of the things that people are screaming about now is that AI takes the soul out of art and literature. There's no emotion in AI, and there is in art.
There is an art.
There is in literature. Good writers put that emotion in there. And the fear is that literature will be produced without that segment, without that thing that makes it great. It'll be just rote stuff. And I tend to agree with that.
Yeah, and that worries me. That is that going to suck the life out of the creative vein that we all have. We were born with it, I hope. I think as we're more inquisitive as we grow up, it grows. But will it not grow because of the blandness of AI?
It could. One of the things that I see that could happen is that those young writers, the ones that just beginning to get the idea that they've got a story to tell, will say, why should I spend my time doing that when AI could do that? Why should I take literature courses in college? Why should I take creative writing courses through seminars, through whatever? Why should I do that when I could do something else and let AI do it for me? And I'm afraid we lose that creative spark, if you will, your term, that we lose that.
Yeah, we don't want to lose that.
No.
More of our guests, including you in here, bring up AI.
I won't use it at all. I just, I'm too old to adopt that kind of technology to learn how to use it.
Yeah, I don't want to say I'm hooked, but When I said, I forget what I said. I think it was yesterday, asking a local author questions. And I put a few more things about you.
Sure.
And it spit this out, and it's not bad.
And they're very useful tasks.
Yes.
For AI. Yeah, no question. There are useful things it could do. I don't want it writing for whom the bell tolls.
No. You said you write every day.
I try to.
Right, so a couple, just because other authors now, like Case Johnston, he says that he writes about 45 minutes every morning. Then this other lady I was telling you about, Patricia Levy, she said when she starts a novel, that's it. Same clothes, sits down at the computer, she writes.
Yep.
Until she's done.
Yeah, and a combination of those two things is what I think most of the authors use. I do. For about 3 years, I taught a non-credit introduction creative writing course at CSN.
And that was right here in Mesquite?
Right, Mesquite, right. And we had some success with that. I think there were 4, maybe 5 books written.
Oh, was it really?
Of those classes.
Oh, that's great.
At least 2 of them were published, self-published. The others, I don't know whether they will ever see the light of day, but they were written. And small writers groups were formed to assist that. But I told one of the things I emphasized with those in those classes was that write at least 10 to 15 minutes a day. If you hit something, keep going. Take as much time as you've got. If you write all morning, and I've done that, I've sat down in the morning to do my 15 minutes of trash, if you will, and hit on something in a short story evolves, and I sit there until it's finished. When I sit down to work on a book, a novel, I review the previous scene, because I write in scenes, or try to write in scenes. I review the previous one and then go on to the next scene and try to complete that. That's my target for the day, is not how many words. Some people use a word target. Some people use a time target. I like a scene target. Try to complete one scene each session, and that's how you get finished.
So have you ever written all night?
Pretty much, yeah. Some of my best work was done late evening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sit there and just go for it until you run out of gas, basically. And that happens. A lot of people journal, and that's a cultural thing I've found. I wasn't raised in that culture where we journaled or kept a diary. But that's a great idea. You should journal, I think. It really helps. It gives you ideas.
Brian, have you ever written for the newspaper?
Yes. I've written some things for the Progress locally. One of the ways I got back into writing, for a long time I didn't write anything. Living in Idaho, there was a Post-Register, I guess it was the newspaper in Idaho Falls, and they used to publish a little squib thing called Voices from the Valley, and people would send in little stories, short stories, one-pagers, and they'd publish them, and they'd pay for them. And I started doing that, and they started publishing them. And then they asked me to do a feature, so I did a feature for them, and then I wrote a couple of other things, but that really got me started back into serious writing. That and the fact that I joined a writers group up there and worked with them extensively for years till I moved here.
Are you in this new writers group here?
I am, but I'm not active yet. Now that Mesquite Works has changed their format, the Wednesday morning sessions will be available to me.
Oh, were they meeting on Wednesday mornings? They're meeting twice a week, weren't they?
Twice a week, Saturdays, every other week. And I think I'll start supporting them on the Wednesday morning at least. So.
Yeah, and that's what a great idea. I see they have a Facebook group. I joined the Facebook group.
Yeah.
so I could get people to interview.
And there's some published. I attended their first meeting, and there's some screenwriters in there, and that's a whole different ball of wax, if you will. There's some people who really know what they're doing in there. And I think it looks like a really interesting group to work with.
Yeah, and that's good. It's good that people share.
Yeah.
And I think most creative people, not all of them, but most creative people do want to share.
I think so. There are some notable exceptions in the past, but authors today are out there in the public eye. They're out there with book signings. They're out there with interviews in major magazines and minor magazines and newspapers, things like that, and podcasts. This is how a beginning writer builds their target audience. They've got someplace to go with their book when it gets published. They've been interviewed. Their name is out there. People know about them. Didn't used to be that way years ago. Only in the select group, everybody in New York knew the authors, but nobody in Chicago did.
Right.
Nobody in Indianapolis did. This kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess in all art, I guess you can be a lone wolf or you can be giving and talk. But that's what I like about our podcast. We bring on a lot of people who are willing to share.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, what they do. Do you have advice for aspiring writers besides put your butt in the seat and write?
That's it. Read. You can't write if you don't read. Read everything. Books, magazines, newspapers. Read. Because in all of that reading, you're going to come up with an idea for what you want to write.
Do you think your traveling helped you with your writing? And just to say this too, you just said read. So you can travel by reading.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes, I was really fortunate in that during my time in the Air Force, as I said earlier, I traveled a lot, and I traveled worldwide. So I got to see some places that people don't normally see. So I took advantage of that. After I finally retired from everything, I traveled extensively by myself for a few years, and then my wife and I traveled as much as we can. That's how you learn. But you learn from books too.
Yeah, especially when you're younger. That was my travels. I could read. I could be transported.
Oh, mine too.
And I must say that you wrote the spy novel here. Is that when Clancy came out? I was an adult by then. But to get his next 900-page book, I would just be, come on. His
first 4 or 5 books were outstanding. They should be, they're just really, really great books. And then they kind of dribbled. As what happens with a lot of authors, after a while, they become staff-written instead of author-written.
Yeah, and I guess that also is not totally depending on how successful you are, that then you begin to build a staff around you. You just said it.
You have to have it.
Staff-written.
You have to have it. The publisher says, we'll publish this one, but we want 2 more. And you get 2 years to produce them. And if you don't have 2 solid ideas to work with, you're in trouble.
So, well, he began to get a little in trouble when the Cold War ended.
Yeah. Yeah.
That took it away. He had to end up going to the drug cartels. Well, the new ones, after he's died, they're still publishing under, and I don't even. I think I tried one. It was like, no.
No. That's true of, again, a lot of those guys. That the only one who's held his own is King. King does his own stuff, and he keeps producing books, whether they're under his own name or one of his many nom de plumes. But he keeps shoving them out there.
Yeah, they're strange books. My wife and I had an encounter with Stephen King. We lived in Florida, and he had a house up at the very end of Casey Key, and that's on the West Coast. And where there used to be a pass-through, there was Midnight Pass, but it got closed because of the sand shifting and everything. But his house was right there. So Gwen and I, it was a good place. We'd take the boat up through the Intercoastal, beach it, and go sit down nice. Well, there he is one day. He's walking across, and I'm like, Gwen, look. See, he out on a thong. Okay, and that's it. I don't want to... It wasn't a pretty sight.
I'm sure not.
But I still respected his genius.
Yeah.
I guess I respected his genius. He puts them out, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
Do you have a funny story?
Earned a lot of drinks telling funny stories in officers' clubs around the world, but right offhand, I can't give you anything, Steve, right tonight.
Okay.
Like that. So.
If you could go back in time to the writing world, where would you go and why?
Oh, boy. I would probably, believe it or not, go to Paris in the early 20s, where Fitzgerald and Hemingway and those guys and women were working. And Paris, at that point in time, was the center of the author's universe. And I'd like to see that. I would have loved to take a part of it, to be a part of it. I've read enough about it so that that would be a good spot to be.
Turning towards the future, what excites you about writing? Do we have any up-and-comers here in Mesquite?
Perhaps this writers group will show some talent, some really good talent. The classes that I mentored, taught, produced some people who could write. But unfortunately, what we got were people who wanted to write their memoirs. And they were older people. There were few young people that were interested in writing, with a couple of exceptions. We had a couple of people in their 20s, but most of them were 50s and 60s. And they either wanted to write a memoir or they just wanted to learn something about the craft, and which was fine. That was the whole point of it. We had a separate memoir class, and again, I emphasized that memoir writing is not just a series of anecdotes about one's life. Normally, the standard memoir biography is, I was born, I lived, and I'm still here, kind of thing. And I don't believe that. I taught or tried to teach them to take the defining incident in their lives and start with that. Just as you start a story with a defining incident, whether it's a murder, whether it's a divorce, whatever it is, that starts your book, starts your story. You do the same thing with a memoir. You take your defining incident and work off from that, but you start with.
Yeah, I can see that, because then you could work backwards how it got there.
Absolutely. Your backstory is always welcome, and you can filter that in throughout the remainder of it. You don't have to start with, such and such a date in such and such a town. I was born. I tell people I was born in 1933. You can do the math. In 33, three very important things happened. Adolf Hitler came to power. Prohibition ended, and I was born.
I was wondering if you were going to include that you were born.
So,
that was very important to you.
Absolutely.
And the people that you helped get a job here.
Yeah. Well, once in a while.
They just didn't know it.
We do help them. Yes. Yes, we do.
Brian, is there anything else that I've missed that you want to talk about?
Steve, you've done an outstanding job with what little you had to go on here. And I really appreciate your asking me to participate. It's been fun.
I think so. I think there's a lot of talent in Mesquite.
Oh, yeah, tremendous amount.
If only the people in Mesquite would listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
I don't think we get many listeners here, so maybe yours will help. Well, Brian, the last question, Linda and I always ask, what's inspired you this week?
I had a birthday a month ago, and that keeps me going. I never expected it to last this long, but fortunately, I'm in pretty good health that I'm able to do what I want to do when I want to do it. That's inspiration enough.
I'm sure. Happy 91st birthday, Brian.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's quite an accomplishment.
They had their chance at me years ago. They missed.
Well, I don't, we can talk about that because I'm 72 now. And, I think about that it's ending, but I don't. And who else? There was someone else in here who was a little older. We talked about that. I'm still planning I'm still planning for tomorrow, next year, 5 years from now. I'm still planning things.
Sure.
And you are too?
Sure, absolutely. Right. I got a book to finish. A couple of them, actually. And I'm working at trying to finish them. Still got some traveling to do. We took a cruise in February.
And you came back without COVID?
Yeah.
Everybody I know takes a cruise. They come back with COVID. I'm like, I'm not cruising anymore.
I think may be naturally immune to COVID because I was certainly exposed to it during the pandemic multiple times, obviously, and never bang.
Yeah, me too.
Would.
Me too. And
So that's not something I spend any time worrying about. It's not a big thing in my life. But the cruise came off. I was a little apprehensive. Traveling as you get older becomes more difficult, but it wasn't that bad. So we're looking maybe toward another cruise. I'd like to make one more to Alaska. Alaska was a tremendously influential place for me when I served up there.
where were you
I was
stationed?
stationed in Elmendorf,
Okay.
but made friends with a homesteader who lived up at Big Lake, and I spent a lot of my free time hunting and fishing and up at the lake and staying with him. And there were 3 or 4 of us who did that. There's some stories there, too. He was married 6 times over the years, and he'd gone up. He's a story in himself. He'd gone up to work in the railroad and then homesteaded. Ultimately sold off his place for something like $1.25 million in the 70s, early 70s. And bought a fishing boat and went into commercial salmon fishing, and then he passed away. But
There's a story there, Brian.
there is a tremendous story. I've dabbled with some of the things up there. One of the first short stories I wrote was a tasked short story that the writers group that was in, they gave us the subject and we had to write a story about it. I'll make this brief. You cut it out or whatever. I know we're out of time, probably.
Oh, well, there is no time. It's a podcast.
Yeah. Okay. The title had to be Last Night at Trapper's Cabin. Well,
Now, is that last night at Trapper's Canyon or
Cabin.
last night at Trapper's Cabin?
cabin. Last night at Trapper's Cabin.
But was it the last night or was it last night?
Could have been.
Okay.
Either way.
Either way. Okay.
However you wanted to interpret it.
Okay.
But you had to write a short story based on that title. While I was up there, a bunch of us went hunting up on the Tyone River with Al, this homesteader. We put our boats in Tyone Lake, or in Lake Lucille. We camped the first night next to this cabin. There was a guy who lived there who had probably murdered his wife. And so I built a story around that fact that we were camped on this land.
Yeah.
And he came to visit us, and we had a couple of drinks around the campfire. And then he went back to the cabin, and Al, the homesteader, said, "You wouldn't think he was a murderer, would you?" And then I could tell that story, finish it out by why they thought he'd killed his wife. Why?
Yeah.
And that was the whole crux of the story. And this story turned out pretty well. But it was a true thing that happened. We had actually done that, and so I just took it into the short story category and built a story around it.
And you published it?
It was a contest entry
Okay.
in Idaho.
You going to share it?
I
Don't have it?
Yeah, he, this guy who lived there, the trapper, we called it Trapper's Cabin, got the title in there. Anyway, this Native American woman lived with him, and she disappeared. And he said that she walked out to the highway and went home back to Nabesna village, where she was from. Al, the homesteader, believed that he killed her and fed her to his sled dogs. And the sled dogs would crunch bones down to nothing.
Yeah.
And scattered in his yard, in his cabin's yard, there were a dozen sled dogs and probably 10 years of bone fragments. So there would be no possible way to connect it. But that was Al's theory, that's what happened to her. And they could never prove anything, on the guy. They lived there happily ever after, as far as I know.
Well, you want to sell some books?
Made a go, sure, let's sell some books.
So you talk about your books and where you can get them?
Amazon. Both books, Swift Mission is available on Amazon. It sells for about $12 or $12.95, something like that. Innocent Victim is also available at Amazon. It's also available on Thrift Books, which sells a lot of used books, and they've been advertising it for some reason. They promoted it last month for whatever reason. I don't know.
Yeah, I got one of mine promoted on Thrift Books. Now, you say Thrift Books?
Yeah.
Like for $5.95 or something.
Yeah.
I was like, how do they have that? I don't.
Yeah, well,
maybe Amazon printed some extra ones,
I
but
don't know. Right now, they say it's not available. It's out of print. Not out of print, out of stock. But I don't know whether they buy them from Amazon and redistribute or not. I have no idea. It's possible.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I didn't even think twice about that.
Yeah, but they're both available on Amazon. I entered it in a first book contest nationwide, Goodreads, and it got good reviews. Didn't make the cut any prizes, but it got good review. So I was pleased with that.
So we'll put the link up there for it.
Okay.
So, and then how about the group here that meets in Mesquite? You want to talk about them a second and when they meet?
As their schedule is, they have a website, of course, and you can give that.
Yeah, I think they're on Facebook too.
Yeah, they're on Facebook too. They meet Saturdays and Wednesdays. I think they stopped meeting in the evening. And I think their meetings are at 11 in the morning on Saturdays and Wednesdays at the library. In the technical, not at the library itself, but across the street. They're welcoming new members, and I think they've got a good chance to influence the writing staff, if you will, in Mesquite. I think they've got a good idea. Cool.
Yeah, for a town of 20,000 people, there's some real talent here.
Absolutely.
In all areas, but there are some writers.
Absolutely. There's some good ones.
Well, Brian, I appreciate you coming in. Quite an inspiration.
I appreciate the opportunity, Steve.
A very young 91 years old. I can only aspire to that.
Yeah, well, just stick around long enough, you will.
So,
You'll be fine.
Unfortunately, you guys aren't out here every Wednesday anymore. So
That's true.
it would be the three of you sitting out there at the table, and I'd come in, and there they are.
Yeah.
So I always thought you guys maybe should have your own show or something, that you would be out there. Don't you think it would work? Talking about things.
Yeah, well, yeah, we'd run out of things to talk about, though. Of course, we're not as talented as you in drawing things out, setting it up.
Oh, it's just good to talk. And there's Denise. Come on in. Oh, well, here's Brian right here.
Yeah.
I'll come out and talk to him in a minute.
Okay.
So you leave it open. We're done.
Good.
See, Brian stayed long enough that now he's got to go write somebody a resume.
Yeah, I'll go talk to him about it, see what they want. They're looking for a job connection. That's a whole different thing.
Oh, that's the one that's over at the...
Yeah.
Well, Brian, hey, thank you very much.
Man,
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I see it in your eyes. You've been listening to lies.
Broadcasting from the Mesquite Works STEAM Center in the scenic Mojave Desert, the Artbox sponsors thank you for listening. You can find us on Spotify and Amazon Music. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We welcome all comments. You can email us at artboxvv@gmail.com. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of its hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the Virgin Valley Artists Association.
But I see the way you move.